Imagine this. You're in your kitchen slicing ingredients for a fresh salad. Lettuce, onion, cucumber, and then the tomato. It's sitting there with the vegetables. It tastes savory. You'd never put it in a fruit salad. You cook it into sauces. You grill it, you season it with salt and olive oil. Then someone casually says, "You know that's actually a fruit, right?" And suddenly, everything feels slightly wrong. A fruit? Really? If tomatoes are fruits, does that mean ketchup is a smoothie? So what's actually going on here? If you like discovering the hidden logic behind everyday things, make sure you subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It helps more than you think. Now let's uncover what's really happening. Because here's the truth most people don't realize. The tomato isn't sometimes a fruit. It is a fruit, and it has always been one. But the reason why has nothing to do with sweetness, flavor, or whether it belongs in a dessert. The confusion exists because we're mixing two completely different systems without realizing it. In everyday life, we classify food by how it tastes and how we use it. Sweet things go into the fruit category. Savory things go into the vegetable category. Apples are sweet, so they're fruits. Carrots aren't sweet, so they're vegetables. It feels intuitive. It feels obvious. It feels right. But that system isn't scientific. It's culinary. Science uses a completely different rulebook. In botany, which is the science of plants, a fruit has a very precise definition. A fruit is the part of a plant that develops from a flower and contains seeds. That's it. Nothing about sugar, nothing about flavor, nothing about breakfast or dessert. If it grows from a flower and it holds seeds, it's a fruit. Tomatoes grow from the yellow flower of the tomato plant. After pollination, that flower transforms. The base of the flower swells and becomes the red structure we eat. And inside? Seeds, dozens of them. By scientific definition, that makes the tomato a fruit. Not metaphorically, not debatably, literally. And here's where most people get confused. We trust our taste buds more than we trust plant biology. Since tomatoes aren't sweet like strawberries or mangoes, our brains automatically categorize them as vegetables. But biology doesn't care about flavor. It cares about structure and reproduction. This is where the hidden difference appears. From a botanical perspective, vegetable isn't even a strict scientific category. There is no clear biological definition of a vegetable the way there is for fruit. Vegetable is mostly a culinary term. It simply refers to edible parts of plants that are typically savory. Carrots are roots, lettuce is leaves, potatoes are tubers, celery is a stalk. These are different parts of the plant. We group them together and call them vegetables because of how we cook and eat them, not because they share a single biological structure. So when someone says tomato is a vegetable, they're speaking the language of the kitchen. When someone says tomato is a fruit, they're speaking the language of science. And both sound correct depending on which system you're using. But here's what surprises most people. This debate became so serious at one point that it reached the highest court in the United States. In 1893, import taxes were applied differently to fruits and vegetables. Tomatoes were being taxed as vegetables. An importer challenged this, arguing that scientifically, tomatoes are fruits. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the court made a fascinating decision. They agreed that botanically, tomatoes are fruits, but legally, they would be treated as vegetables because that's how people commonly use them in cooking. In other words, science said one thing, culture said another, and culture won for legal purposes. So the tomato became both a fruit and a vegetable, depending on context. And that's where the real lesson hides. The tomato isn't confusing. Our categories are. We assume words like fruit and vegetable are universal truths, but they're not. They're tools. Different systems use different definitions depending on what they're trying to explain. Biology cares about reproduction. Cooking cares about flavor. Law cares about commerce. Same tomato, different perspectives. And once you understand that, the contradiction disappears. In the next part, we're going to explore something even more surprising, because tomatoes aren't the only foods living this double life. And once you see how many other vegetables are secretly fruits, you might never look at your grocery cart the same way again. Because sometimes the simplest things hide the most misunderstood truths. Now imagine walking through a grocery store again. You pass by the vegetable section. Tomatoes are there, peppers are there, cucumbers, zucchini, eggplants. Everything looks normal. But now you know the rule. If it grows from a flower and contains seeds, it's a fruit. And suddenly the entire aisle starts to look different, because tomatoes aren't the exception, they're just the beginning. If you're enjoying these kinds of everyday mysteries explained in a simple way, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. It tells us you want more of this. Now let's go deeper. Here's what surprises most people. Bell peppers, fruits. Cucumbers, fruits. Zucchini, fruits. Eggplants, fruits. All of them develop from flowers. All of them contain seeds. All of them meet the botanical definition perfectly. Even pumpkins are fruits. So why don't we call them that? Because in the kitchen, we don't organize food by plant anatomy. We organize it by flavor and function. Sweet things usually go into desserts. Savory things go into main dishes. That's the real dividing line in everyday life. And this is where most people get confused. They think fruit and vegetable are opposite categories. But they're not opposites. One is a scientific classification, the other is a culinary habit. They overlap. A tomato is botanically a fruit and culinarily a vegetable at the same time. There's no contradiction once you understand the systems behind the words. But here's something even more interesting. Not all fruits are sweet. Think about olives. They grow from flowers and contain seeds. That makes them fruits, but no one bites into an olive expecting candy-level sweetness. Avocados? Also fruits, yet we spread them on toast with salt and pepper. So sweetness was never the real rule. It was just a pattern we noticed. And once you see that, you realize something bigger. The categories we grow up with often feel natural and permanent, but many of them are human shortcuts. They help us cook, shop, and communicate quickly. They're practical, but they're not always scientifically precise. This happens everywhere, not just with food. We simplify complex systems into labels that feel intuitive, and over time, those labels feel like facts. But sometimes, when you look closer, the story underneath is more nuanced. The tomato is a perfect example. It exposes the gap between how we experience the world and how the world is structured biologically. Your taste buds tell you one thing, plant science tells you another, and neither one is wrong. They're just answering different questions. Cooking asks, how should I use this? Biology asks, how does this plant reproduce? Two different questions, two different answers. Same tomato. And that's why debates like this feel strangely emotional. It's not really about tomatoes, it's about how we define things. It's about whether everyday language or scientific precision should have the final say. Back in 1893, when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that tomatoes should be taxed as vegetables, they didn't deny the science. They simply chose practicality over botanical accuracy. In the real world, people treated tomatoes like vegetables, so legally that's what they became. And that decision still shapes how we talk about them today. But now, when someone says tomatoes are fruits, you understand exactly what that means. It's not a fun fact meant to be clever. It's a reminder that definitions depend on context. So the next time you slice a tomato for a sandwich, you'll know something most people don't fully think about. You're holding a fruit that became a vegetable in the kitchen, a fruit that became a vegetable in court, a fruit that reveals how flexible our everyday categories really are. And once you see that, you start noticing it everywhere, because sometimes the simplest things hide the most misunderstood truths. If you enjoyed this breakdown, like the video, share it with someone who still thinks ketchup is made from vegetables, and subscribe for more simple things explained in ways you've never thought about before.